There's one choice that every new World of Warcraft character has to make. How are they going to level? It's a very simple question that has a multitude of answers. Once your character's level 10, whether you started there with an allied race or leveled through a starting zone, you're given this choice. Pick a chromie time. 9 different options, but which one is the best? I have made it my mission to find out exactly that. I'm going to level through each expansion and note down my findings, starting with Wrath of the Lich King. Considering the goal of this video is to be as informative as possible, I have decided to split it into 3 major sections that I believe will answer as many questions as possible. At the end of each, I will be giving a rating out of 10, starting with... As I mentioned before, I created a brand new character and took them to beautiful sunny Northrend with the goal of experiencing everything it has to offer. To do so, I chose the hero class of the expansion, a paladin, and to get the purest form of Wrath of the Lich King leveling, I quested in Northrend with as little assistance as possible. No guides, no heirlooms, and utilizing little to no rested XP, only using gear from quest rewards and drops. Just flying around doing whatever task presented itself to me and picking the zones I leveled in based off what looked fun. I have abstained from doing dungeons, all I did was quest. That wasn't the original plan, but I'll talk more about that later. This is as baseline of an experience as it possibly can be. Sadly, I am stuck with the full warband XP buff. If I could click it off for this expedition, I would. But aside from that, I was going for as pure of a Northrend leveling as possible. And boy, do I have a lot of information that I gathered from this. Starting with the quests themselves, the best news here is that I reached level 70 without doing every single zone in Wrath of the Lich King. If there's anything I wholeheartedly support in this game, it's player choice. I ended up doing the equivalent of 4 full zones along my journey. In reality, I only completed the majority of Borean Tundra and Solazar Basin, but in addition to that, I did a good amount of Dragonblight and the Grizzly Hills, with pieces of the Storm Peaks and Ice Crown sprinkled in. This is great news. It means that your Northrend experience is flexible. Maybe you want the Howling Fjord and Grizzly Hills with a side of Dragonblight and Ice Crown. Hey, perhaps you want to get to the Storm Peaks as fast as possible so you can feel the pain of having to do every quest it has to offer. Or you could even channel your inner Shaka Zulu and pincer Northrend in a bullhorn fashion. That is completely up to you. Well, not completely. There is an asterisk on this player choice. It's not a big one, more like a medium to small asterisk. Barely noticeable really. I'll show you what I mean. Here's a map of Northrend. Notice anything? If it was that the Crystal Song Forest and Wintergrasp swapped names, you'd be correct. But even more importantly, only 2 zones in Northrend start at level 10, which is the level you arrive there at. Thankfully, this isn't too big of a deal, but it is a symptom of Wrath of the Lich King being a pretty old expansion. When Wrath was released, The Dark Knight had just come out in theaters, Barack Obama was elected for his first term as President of the United States, and I was busy crushing ghouls in Wizard 101. Sorry for hitting you with the mind flay there, but the age of Northrend shows. But what if I told you this was a good thing? Wrath of the Lich King is touted as one of the best expansions of all time for a reason. It brought us vehicles, end of questline cutscenes, and the fishing derby. That event is absolutely my jam. Did you ever notice that when Wrath Classic and the others garnered such popularity, we started seeing some of its features back in retail? Talent trees, mid-level flying, world-building quests. A quest where you go into the Boom Boom stall because you ate some bad berries doesn't progress the story of defeating the Lich King at all, but it does give the world character. It does make the zones feel inhabited. Look, that is the only bathroom I found in all of Northrend. It must be protected at all costs. Now, if you were to only quest through Northrend, no dungeons or time-walking events, what kind of time should you be expecting to devote to it? With no heirlooms or guides, I reached level 70 in 11 hours and 26 minutes. Seeing as you start at level 10, that's a little over 5 levels an hour. It's certainly not the fastest method if that's what you're looking for, but remember it is without any heirloom gear, using any rested XP, or doing dungeons. It is pure questing. Questing, that all in all was pretty fun to do. If you want a video ranking the zones of Northrend, let me know, but I can confidently say that they are, for the most part, wonderfully crafted. Let's look at the Borean Tundra and see just how much variety they put into these zones. You have 2 fortresses, multiple beachheads, each with a different theme, from ruins to scourge to bandits to an entire Murloc war, mage towers, a scourge city with both a floating Rammus and a destroyed one, PETA posers, Tuskar burial sites, an airstrip with mining rigs next to it, and the epicenter of a war between the most powerful mages in existence and the dragons that tend to the very source of Azeroth's arcane magic itself. All in one zone, and all with quests that fit their theme, yet don't get too overbearing. Yes, there are some quests that are too long or too short, but these are outliers. There are some other outliers to Wrath's questing as well, and it loops back to its age. It is one of 2 expansions that will have this problem. It came out before the built-in quest helper was finished. The helper came out in patch 3.3 of Wrath, which was towards the end. So some jankiness happens with how it tracks quests, namely if a quest has 2 parts, it only shows the end goal of the quest on the map. For example, say a quest tells you to pick up seeds from a bag and go plant them in a field. The quest tracker will tell you where the field is, but not where the bag is. So in some cases, you will have to read the quest text, which is a doomsday scenario for some, but if it is, you'll be pleased to hear that it's pretty rare to have to do this. So the zones are good, the quests are good, but what about the gear they give you? The rewards are also pretty good. I never felt undergeared. It wasn't until the end that I was annihilating mobs, but it was a smooth gearing experience. With heirloom and dungeon gear, it will be even smoother, especially on the trinket side. A decent bit of the Wrath trinkets are tertiary stats. I rarely found a main stat trinket, but the actives on these trinkets are pretty decent. I will talk more about how well prepared Wrath gets you in terms of getting ready for current content later in the video. With everything considered, I'm going to rate Wrath of the Lich King's questing experience an 8 out of 10. Considering 10 out of 10 is perfect, that's pretty heckin' good. The only points off are due to the jankiness and the storm peaks. Vehicle quests had just came out that the devs wanted to use a decent bit. Some of the quests using them we don't really see in later expansions for a reason. Along with that, the quest helper isn't the most helpful, just mostly helpful. I swear that sentence makes sense somehow. And as for the storm peaks, I love the zone, don't get me wrong. I'm just not a fan of questing in it. They still had some learning to do when designing a zone with flying in mind. An 8 out of 10 still sets a good standard for what a well-built questing experience should be, but it's only one part of what makes a good expansion. So let's talk about. I have to put a disclaimer here because the original plan was to quest and queue for dungeons at the same time. But when I made that plan, I didn't realize Blizzard made the rotating time walking events not only permanent, but give access to their dungeons starting at level 10. So it felt unfair to test dungeons when the time walking ones were such a big variable. At the time of recording this, Warlords of Draenor is the current time walking. That being said, I have leveled way more healers than any sane person would. I'm talking every healer multiple times. Don't ask me why, I don't know. I guess I'm a maniac. So I certainly know a lot about them, namely that they are pretty ideal for leveling. Let's look at why. When leveling via dungeons, there are certain qualities that make a set of them really good for that purpose. Length, dungeon quests, simplicity, and how fun they actually are to do. Each dungeon you queue is like a roll of the dice on if it will be a good experience or a bad experience. So much so that Blizzard knows this and gives an aptly named buff. To be good leveling dungeons, they have to incorporate all 4 aspects to some degree or another. Let's go down the list and see if they achieved that goal. Wrath was really the beginning of a standardized dungeon length. Yes, it has some longer ones, namely the Culling of Stratholme, but the majority are in the short to medium range. Some of them are even known for their spammability, for example, Utgard Keep. In fact, some of them were even designed in a circular layout. That doesn't really come into play too much in the modern day with teleporting to dungeons and all, but it is a testament that these dungeons were made with repeatability in mind. Where that circular design does come into play is with quests. Each dungeon has around 3 to 4 easy to complete quests, which scale with your level and how much XP they give. Given the large amount of dungeons that Wrath has to offer, they contribute a decent amount to your overall XP gain. There aren't many quests that you can't complete in a single run. Some of them are easy to forget, namely the Nexus with forgetting the book, but off the top of my head I can't think of a single quest that requires multiple runs if you do everything right. But how hard is it to do everything right in these dungeons? Not very hard, to be honest. Some of the layouts can be confusing if you haven't done them before, but in most cases just follow your group. It only really takes doing these dungeons once to understand the pathing, and the boss mechanics are as easy as one would expect from a 17-year-old expansion, which does include mechanics you won't see in modern dungeons, like multiple debuffs that have to be dispelled, even though your dispel has an 8-second cooldown in the modern day. Thankfully, these buffs don't wipe your group. Usually they can run their full duration without hurting you too much. There are some stinker dungeons, that's for sure, ones that suffer from the same thing that the rest of Wrath suffers from. It was the third version of World of Warcraft. They were experimenting with new things, and when that happens, there's bound to be the good, the bad, and the ugly. That being said, Wrath of the Lich King is tied for the most dungeons in a single expansion. Keyword being expansion, as vanilla has them all beat. So that does mean that your chances of queuing into the bad ones are lower than any of the later expansions. I do plan to make a dungeon tier list at some point. Let me know if you'd be interested in that. What interests me though are these dungeons, and with that flawless transition, let's see how flawless the rating will be. Woo! 2 good transitions in a row, but call me the Kansas City Chiefs cause I'm not gonna three-peat. The dungeon score is a solid 7 out of 10. Like I said, there are a few that I have always found unpleasant to run. That is not to say, oh no, not this place. More of a, dang it, I was hoping it wasn't this one. And while that seems like a very arbitrary way of looking at it, these are my ratings. Maybe you like running the Hall of Stone where you have to sit for 5 minutes as mobs slowly spawn and your healer's mana runs out because you're always in combat during it. Personally, I do not enjoy that, but the good outweighs the bad, thus the 7 out of 10 is a fine score in my book. So the questing is great, the dungeons are good. Let's talk about... I'm not exactly sure what to call this part. If you have a good idea for it, tell me what you would name it. But a big part of how good a leveling experience is has to do with how well it prepares your character for the current content. What item level do you end at? How much gold does it give you? Along with some more minor things like free bags. The most important part of that is the gear. Can you finish leveling through Wrath and head straight into the War Within? Yes, and kind of? After only questing, my paladin got to item level 338, which is 12 off the minimum needed to queue War Within dungeons. Well within reach of doing a few world quests to get that last bit of item level. Add in heirlooms and any gear you get from dungeons on your journey and you might already be there. Wait a second, perhaps you could use all the gold you got to buy gear, right? Let's see how much I made from questing. 4,636, which I honestly don't know if that is good or not. This being the first expansion I test has its advantages and disadvantages. Gold is not as easy as looking at the minimum dungeon item level requirement. 5k gold itself isn't a lot, but it is enough to buy a full set of bags. Look, I don't think people really level for the gold. It is a minor detail, but it is nice to know either way. In future videos, if I earn an exceptional amount of gold from a particular expansion, then I'll be sure to make note of that. Part of me has an inkling that it'll be a similar amount of gold across the board, but I could be completely wrong about that, so I'm gonna test anyways. However, was I forgetting something? Oh right. The bags you get. You're gonna upgrade your bags. Throughout my entire journey, I got one 12 slot, one 10 slot, and a 6 slot bag. Considering you can get a 32 slot bag for 200 to 300 gold on the auction house, the best I can say is that I got enough bags to not have to worry too much about the space during my leveling. Every time I was near a vendor, I cleared my bags. They only fully filled about once or twice. With all that considered, how well does Wrath of the Lich King prepare your character for current content? I'm gonna give this another 7 out of 10. Just questing alone almost gets you enough item level for the War Within dungeons. You get enough gold to buy a couple upgrades, including bags, but it is not a groundbreaking amount. If I were to take this character into the War Within, I would be happy with its starting point. It could be better, and it could be a lot worse. I already have a max level paladin, so I won't be taking this to max level, but I can use the extra gold. I spent a lot of it recently, way too much of it to be honest. Now to the part of the video where I look back over everything and give Wrath of the Lich King one final rating. I plan to do a grand video once I have leveled through every expansion, but with this being the first of the 9, I don't have much of a reference other than leveling I did on previous characters. So for an overall rating, I am putting Wrath of the Lich King at a solid 8 out of 10. Yes, 2 of the 3 sections had a rating of 7, but with everything combined, the negatives start to disappear. Part of my problem is that some of the dungeons are of a design philosophy that just didn't work. Well, if you're questing and dungeoning at the same time, that is less of an issue, as you will need less of the dungeons overall. When it comes to preparing your character for the war within, the big part is what item level you get by the end, which it gets you a stone's throw away from the only item level gated content. Wrath of the Lich King content is fun to play, gives good rewards, and levels you in a decent amount of time. It has given me a great first impression to my goal of testing every expansion. I chose it to start for that very reason, to be honest, to get a baseline for what we should expect. And who knows, maybe by the end of this I will realize that I somehow have rose-tinted goggles for an expansion I never even played when it was current content. My first experience with it was Wrath of the Lich King Classic, but next week we will go further back in time to the oldest content that is still in the game, the Burning Crusade. You know, some say it is actually the best expansion of all time. We'll have to see how that translates into the modern game, just like we did with Wrath of the Lich King today. What are your predictions? And what expansions would you like to see before the rest? I haven't decided if I should just go in order or skip around based off popular demand. Thank you so much for watching. My name has been Kale, and have a wonderful journey.